Welcome to People Are Everything, the podcast that's a bit like Desert Island Discs. But rather than bring music, I ask my guests to share the 5 people that have shaped the person they are today. This is my very first episode, and I'm super honoured and excited to introduce you to Mark McCartney. I was a guest on Mark's show, What is a Good Life, so it seemed fitting that he should be the first guest on mine. Mark is a seasoned podcaster, and in his show, he has interviewed over 200 people to ask the secret to living well. And his guests are as diverse as they are enlightening, and I can only hope to achieve his success with mine. As you'll come to hear, Mark is warm, articulate, sincere, and to top it all, has the most gorgeous voice. Our discussion delves into the significance of giving, the power of community, and the beauty of noticing and appreciating others in our lives. We also talk about parenting, love, the importance of self-awareness, and that the true definition of success is not what we have, but who we are connected with, which I guess is the driving force behind this podcast. I know you're going to love this conversation as I did, so it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Mark McCartney. Hello, Mark. Welcome to People Are Everything. This is my first go. I'm very excited about this, and I'm so excited you're my first guest because I think it was the first time I'd ever done a podcast was on your show, What is a Good Life? So that's already answered the first question, which is how did we meet? Although I think we met. I think it was Jindy actually that introduced us, wasn't it?
It was indeed, yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invite. I'm honoured to be your first guest as well, Julia.
Well, let's see how this goes. If it's awful, then you probably won't thank me. But someone has to be first, Mark, and it's you. I remember the first time I met Jindy, actually. I just was so impressed by him. I thought, what a sincere guy and a very intelligent human being, a very sensitive human being. And the thing he's trying to do is complicated. And it's a difficult message, but he seems to land it very, very well. So I'm hoping to get him on at some stage. But how did you meet Jindy?
We met through a mutual friend in Berlin, and then pretty much over the first coffee, just clicked instantaneously. And then ever since then, a lovely mix of, sharing genuinely, honestly, and kind of transparently, but not oversharing either, if you get me. And just from then on, we just became very good friends, and that kind of way of communicating kind of maintained as well. Just a lot of, a lot of openness and kind of collaboration within it. So he's turned out to be one of my very good mates here in Berlin.
Well, he's my go-to guy for lots of men in my life as well. I'm always sort of saying, you should speak to Jindy. And they do. And sort of little gangs forming, really, isn't it? Which is really positive. As you can probably tell by the title of this show, I don't really have a problem with collecting people. In fact, they're my favourite thing. I see all the people in my life as like little treasures. And honestly, I find, humans the most interesting thing of my day. Understanding them, understanding myself in relationship to them. So this is why I wanted to do this. I wanted to kind of shine a light on it a bit, that this is like a fundamental part of my life, and I know with all the digital age stuff, everyone's talking about AI this and AI that, and I love a bit of tech. Don't get me wrong, I do tech, but I believe in people, Mark. I'm standing by us. I don't really want to think of us as being replaced by robots. So let's get into this, because the format really is I'm going to ask you who are the kind of 5 people that really have influenced you in your life. And I just kind of nicked the idea off Desert Island Discs, to be honest. I thought, well, rather than bring music, why don't you bring people? And, let's just see how this goes, because, you've got to start somewhere with the format, haven't you? Why not this one? So before we get into the 5 people, why don't we just kind of do a little bit of you and your background and what you've done, but also who are you? Who are you, Mark? Tell us stuff.
So I'm a writer, coach, and podcast host in Berlin. I've come to this formally through a 15-year career in finance, but around 8 or 9 years, about 9 or 10 years ago now, actually, just explore lots of self-inquiry, seeing a therapist, getting into meditation, silent retreats, exploring with all sorts really, like journaling, psychedelics, dark room experiences. My whole life or inner world became of huge interest and intrigue. So even the last role that I had in finance, like good things were happening. The company got to ring the bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Things were on the up and up in that sense. But I'd already taken a sabbatical to India where I was doing Vipassana, 10-day silent retreats, and a bunch of other things. So I think at that point, without having any clarity as to what exactly was coming next, I knew I wanted to do something different. So I left all that to go to Peru for a year with my wife to stay in the countryside to explore these things further, like different types of philosophy, psychology, just fascinated with who I was and how I relate to people. I'd met my wife in northern India 9 years ago, and so she's from Germany, and then we ended up moving to Berlin. And here I started up a coaching practice. I'm just insanely curious as to kind of what makes us tick, what the human experience, the genuine human experience is. And so I started a project where I've now interviewed over 200 people around the question of what is a good life. I've brought that into some corporates in terms of a workshop, but I also work with executive teams, just really in hosting conversations, dialogues where we can quite simply say like what we think, feel and notice. I think a lot of relationships, it may sound very simple, but I think a lot of relationships will greatly benefit from, can we just say what's actually happening right now? And so that's what I'm also fascinated in as well.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to have fun unpicking that lot. Because that's not typical, is it? You know, if you think about most people's kind of life path, that's quite something. And I love your podcast, by the way. I'm just going to do a little plug for yours.
Thank
And
you
it's
very
such a
much.
great show because it forces people to have to really think about what makes them happy and gives them that sense of contentment and achievement. And I'm, you know, at some point here, I'd like to ask you when we've kind of finished with who are the key people in your life that have sort of shaped you. I think one of the questions I really want to know is like, you know, has that changed those people, have they changed your view of success and what success looks like and what is important to you? Because I think everybody you meet kind of shapes you in some way, doesn't it? And informs the person that you are and changes your values and perspectives. So I mean, I've asked you ahead of this to kind of think about key people. So what's your earliest one? What do you think is your formative years and somebody, or maybe it isn't that, maybe it's someone else, but who's first? Let's just do it that way. Who's first on your list?
Do you know, it's interesting because I've been trying to give this some thought, and I actually struggled even to come up with a fifth person. So I don't know what that says about me, but the first one's very clear, and that's my mother. It's Yeah, my mum was a school teacher, and then she was also a single mother and raised three of us by herself, obviously with the help of some family members as well. But yeah, she's incredibly influential on me. And the older we get now, while I think because we're both quite strong characters, I think at times we know where our boundaries are with each other. So it's kind of become a lovely friendship at this point. She's obviously still my mother, but I was just back in Ireland last week, and I don't really feel that thing where some people point to sometimes as it's uncomfortable to go back to the family home because they're your parents and this and that. I just have amazing conversations with her at this point, and I can start to appreciate more of our similarities and kind of cherish them, as opposed to what I think sometimes happens when we're growing up. If you have a similar parent or sibling, that can also be the point of conflict, or
Yeah.
when you're not aware of who you are, you don't even notice how similar you are and how you're seeing things so similarly. But she's an amazing person from the point of view of like she's just how loving she is. She's also tough, but she's like just a big softie as well. So it's just a combination of all of those things. And for all that she clearly prioritized with us, it's just someone who I feel like immense gratitude and love for.
And do you get that feeling of like, when you say about going home, that like just being with her is like being home, like where you feel your fullest, most comfortable self and can express yourself, exactly how you feel in that moment.
Yeah, like I think that's become a big priority in my life in pretty much all settings at this point. But especially at home, like there's a comfort, there's a quality based on the household that she built and the emotion within it as well, that just I can relax into very, very quickly. Like
I
it's,
like that.
do you know what I mean? Like it going home feels like I don't know, putting on a nice pair of slippers. Like
Yeah,
it's just, and I'm not trying to make something sound perfect, because I think we do that with families a lot, and even with partners, we try to idealize certain things. It's not like everything is just continuously a bed of roses, but particularly going back there as an adult, and now even going back there because I haven't lived in Ireland for 15 years, going back there with now my own child as well. I don't know, it's just, it feels like an immensely, I don't know, comfortable, loving and kind of safe haven from the world. And plus she gets on amazingly well with my wife, and we're all quite like similar in certain different ways. So it just feels like a really relaxed time.
and does she know all this? Have you told her?
Yeah, yeah. My- I think like my wife and mother they're very different in some ways, but they're quite similar in some other ways. And I think they're both well used to like kind of a barrage of words and like when I send my mother birthday cards, I usually include like a long letter within it, which kind of outlines all of this, and I think which probably makes my mum a little bit uncomfortable and happy, I'm sure. And I'd say the same thing I afford my wife as well, who just kind of goes, I'm not really a wordy person. So that's generally how it's received.
Do you know what? I'm just laughing to myself because I have a lovely relationship with my son, but I was teasing him the other day that, like, if I text him, I might text him something quite important, could be a lengthy text. And his latest thing, well, I don't know if it's the latest thing, he's always done it. He communicates in the funniest of ways. So it's either a one-word answer, or his latest thing is to put FR, 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 which for ages I thought, what does that even mean? And apparently it's for real, for real, for real, for real. I'm like, so I think that's a yes. I think it just means yes, but in his speak. But I'd like to think, gosh, I'd love it if years from now he was to kind of be on a podcast and say nice things about me. Oh, I'm going to work hard to get that, see what I can do. Oh, that's wonderful. I mean, I have mum envy, as you know, because we had a chat about my background back in the day. So when I hear about the sort of coziness and warmth and comfort of people's mothers, I get a bit gooey. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, mum's number one. Okay, number two. You say you've only got four. I'm going to push you on the fifth.
No,
Let's go for two.
I've got a fifth one. I'm saying
Okay, good.
four came easily to me. The next one is actually an auntie of mine who passed a few years ago. Maura was her name, and I don't know. I used to call her Saint Maura even when she was living. So this isn't some eulogy, or I'm not eulogizing someone's memory or something like that. She was just someone who left a profound influence on me in terms of her kindness, her lack of ego, and just a very clear sense that I think it's very rare to find someone who you think is giving without an expectation, and even expectation for how they might be perceived. And so I remember this is something that's so clear to me. So as I said, I didn't live in Ireland for the last 15 years or so. But I remember when I'd go back home, Maura and I would always go for a lunch together. That was our kind of a routine. And she was fairly simple needs. She wasn't very flashy at all, but she liked to go to a nice restaurant. And so I remember one January morning, like freezing cold in Dublin, walking up this street called Harcourt Street on the way to the restaurant that we were going to. And there was a guy on the street who was asking for money. And I remember Maura, anytime she'd go by anyone asking for money, it's like she had like a special pocket in her jacket with fivers or more in it. Like she'd never give coins to anyone. And I remember, so as soon as I think he saw the money coming out, I kind of rolled my eyes thinking, this is just Maura. And he looked very obviously grateful. But then what she did next was she just took his hand and kind of pressed his hand between both her hands. And then she just said something very simple, like, it's very cold this year, isn't it? How are you doing? And straight away there was a wash of like a welling up inside of him. And then she just sat down beside him, like in her Sunday best or whatever, and just sat with them and chatted for a few moments on the way to the restaurant. And I could give you 1,000 examples like that, where it's just very clear. Like she was very religious in Ireland, raised a Catholic. And yet I always kind of preface that with, there's very few people that I actually saw embody the values of that. Like I think religion for a lot of people almost serves a functional thing. Like you're a byproduct of where you've grown up. I'm not sure how many people just fully embody everything. But Maura did that. And, she used to, when we were growing up, she used to spend a few nights a week at our place, helping my mum out with us in the evenings or the mornings. And I remember when I hit, 30 odd or something like that, I was reflecting back thinking like, Jesus, when she did this, she was just my age. And, I'm not trying to make myself just sound like selfish and self-obsessed or something, but generally, like, to give up a couple of evenings a week for someone that aren't even your own kids, I remember kind of being floored by that, thinking back on it. So she's always someone who, when I lived abroad, would always talk once a week kind of thing. And she was just incredibly patient, and she touched, she worked as a teacher as well in inner city Dublin, in a difficult area for a lot of kids. Like they're sometimes she'd mention people's fathers being in jail and this kind of thing, and she just had this grace about her. Like, you could almost say she was naive to a point or something, like, but she just had this, I'd view it more as like grace or a trust or a hope in people that I've rarely ever seen, to be honest.
I love that. I mean, when you said about the pressing of the hands, my first thought was, how many times that person has been touched.
Yeah.
Like in the day or the week or the month or even the year, because generally we kind of either step over or step round or we're uncomfortable with that kind of thing, aren't we, as human beings? And for him, that transference of love, it wasn't just about money, or the money would have been very welcomed because it was cold and he could probably go and buy something, a hot drink or whatever. But it's that transference of her, kind of emotional warmth as well, and that kind of knowing in her that's probably more important. Her humanity with him was more important in that moment, and I imagine that stuck with him. And just thinking about your podcast, the What is a Good Life, I don't know, it's aspirational, isn't it? Is to be that way. Like you say, were you like that at 30? Probably not. I don't know what I was doing at 30, probably quite self-absorbed, I'd imagine, thinking about myself, my career, my life, my friends, my everything. Whereas this person was purely about, what can I do for you today? And to me, that's a very aspirational thing. And do you think that shaped you in how you have been in your life? Can you pinpoint things where you've gone, that's very much like her? That's where I got that from.
I think there's definitely an element of faith. Like we used to talk about God, and I probably would have come back to an idea of faith, not in an organized religious sense, but a real curiosity as to, what is this reality all about? What is the point or the purpose of this? There was different times than I would have, when you just mentioned how people generally might react to someone on the street. Like when I lived in London, doing food runs every Wednesday on the streets of London, and kind of just sitting down on the ground and having chats with people and realizing like just how, I don't know, how easy it would be for any of us to end up in certain places. I remember talking to an Irish guy who the drink had got the better of him, I think, by the sounds of it. He used to be in construction and things like that. And just seeing our shared humanity, and realizing, naming some of the same places or the clubs we used to go to in Dublin. And, I was no saint at the weekends in my 20s and early 30s, like just realizing that there's not a big difference between he and I. It's just, probably some very simple things went a different way. But just when you mentioned that as well, I remember, and I generally have fairly, I wouldn't dress particularly flashy, so I'd be wearing a woolly jumper and a hat and a pair of jeans when I was out there. And if I was sat on the ground with someone, I remember just thinking a profound kind of moment where I was like, if I was walking down somewhere in Kensington going to work and I was wearing my best suit, just maybe how eyes might be drawn or how people might perceive you, an awareness of that. And then if I was sat down on the ground, when I sat down on the ground beside someone, just how people's eye lines didn't even seem to go to the top of my head. Like,
Yeah. You're
it
just
was just like,
invisible, aren't you?
yeah, just to maintain your kind of vision and looking ahead. So there was different things like that where I definitely feel her influence, and just a general trust, I think, in life. Like, she was never too concerned with acquiring things. And for me at this point in my life, like just even with the theme of this podcast, like relationships are just so far ahead of everything else in my life at this point that it made it even easier to switch careers in my mid-30s and take my time with this. Like, because I've got like amazing connections with people in my life, whether that's with my wife, my family, in my immediate neighborhood, people that I've met even through the podcast like yourself, or just great conversations that I'm having with people all over the world. And Maura's like capacity to just, I don't know, to really be positive, but not in some performative way. I think I would attribute it to just the investment she made in people, and she really, really made time for people.
I love that. When you're speaking, I was thinking I've had some tricky times in my life, and I always say to myself, I don't think I'll ever fall that far. When I think about people, homeless people on the street, and I'm not the best at that. I don't quite know how to approach. I remember seeing a lady eating, I think sort of chicken, boxed chicken from a bin. And I went. I didn't have any cash on me. I went round the corner, and I said to myself, if she's still there when I come back, I'm going to give her this money. And it was probably £10, something like that, maybe 20, something like that. But an amount that I wanted her to buy her own lunch and not have to eat out of this bin. And I took it round, and she was still there, and I just handed it to her and I just said something like, please, buy, I want you to buy yourself a nice lunch. And I was blushing. I was so awkward. I felt so like, what is she going to say? Is she going to, I don't know, you never know, do you? And I think there's that social awkwardness. We don't get, it's such an uncomfortable thing. And she just gave me the best smile. It was just worth every minute of it. And I was on cloud 9.
Yeah.
And it was then I remembered that, actually it's the act of the giving bit that's the good bit, right? I mean, she gets a lunch, but I get to enjoy that smile and that feeling of I took that risk, that social risk, and it paid off. So if she did that on the daily basis, I imagine, when it was her time, that she would have put her head down and said that was good. I did a good thing. I was a good person. I did some good things in my life. Or she probably didn't think anything at all because she's that selfless. There was no need for a kind of an acknowledgement. She just was that person.
Yeah, I think there's something. There's a spiritual teacher, Ramdas, who I always enjoyed listening to, and he was kind of thinking. He talks about giving as, the left hand, something passing through the left hand to the right hand. I think that there's something even in not even noticing the giving at some point that I think I'm definitely not in that camp, if you know what I mean. But there's something about, I think, seeing the connectedness between us and just actually looking after ourselves, because we are all part of this we. It's not the me or the I. But it's really interesting, like even just research that tells us, like religious scripts from time immemorial have told us that you actually, an element of living a good life, this giving part is what fundamentally makes us feel great. We all have this experience of it. And yet I don't know whether it's something to do with our culture or how we're raised, that we just somehow we just don't like let go completely with that, because it's almost in our own interests, and yet we still don't do it. And I'm very much talking about myself within that, like definitely moments of generosity, but lots of space for more, I guess. But it's just funny what you mentioned there too. I was reading some research last week where in general we seem to fear even starting up small talk with strangers.
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
we're worried, or sorry, we keep it to small talk because we assume that nobody really cares or wants to get into a meaningful conversation. But actually when we do, it's far easier than we ever anticipated. And this is something that I'm fascinated with as well. Like you mentioned just Jindy at the start of this, and he and I have held some conversations even in person in Berlin with a group of men that had never met each other before. And we had each had groups of 15. And with just one simple question, can you tell us something about your earliest childhood memory or friendship?
Mm-hmm.
We had a whole group of people that had never spoken together sharing really meaningful things. And I think that's something that we have some barrier or blocker up against the idea that that it would be inappropriate or that it wouldn't be normal. But I think this is the very thing that kind of nourishes us or fills us up with something, or even dissolves some of these boundaries or barriers that we think exist between us,
It's funny you should mention that, because I was thinking about that the other day. And I coined this little phrase in my head called the dropped purse theory. So if you see, you know this yourself. Sorry, I've got a big croaky throat this morning. Water. You notice this yourself. If somebody drops something in the street, 10 people will rush forward to be the one that picks that up, because we want to be the one that picks it up, don't we? We want to be the one that goes, hey, you dropped something. And there's that little friendly exchange and everyone feels good for a minute. But I think that it's because it's a very obvious social cue. It says this person needs me and I can help, I can be helpful. So it's obvious. And I think that's in human connection, that first initial kind of engagement, is just a sort of shyness about that. It's like, who's going to be the first person to engage? Who's going to say the first thing? Who's going to reveal something about themselves? And it's a very sort of tentative thing, because I think people need to be invited. And I think what you just described with your chat with Jindy and that group of men, is that there was an invitation. And I just try and be that person as much as I can. I like to invite conversation. And I think once people feel that they've been invited, they tend to open up. Okay, so that's Maura. Number 3. Who's 3 on the list?
Number 3 would be Eva, or Ifa, as the German pronunciation be, who's my wife. And as I mentioned at the very start, we met around 9 years ago in India. And unbeknownst really to anyone, after 5 weeks of traveling with each other, we were also engaged. And I don't know, there was something about so when we first met, we met in this place called McLeod Ganj outside Dharamsala in northern India. And after our first coffee, it had just gone straight into, like, there was just no masking, no bullshit. Like, it was just, why are you here? And I could have said, I'm doing Vipassana, I'm deepening my meditation practice, and tried to sound quite like focused on consciousness and spirituality and all of these things. And I said, like, I've been a bit of a mess in relationships before. Like, I've been jealous, I've been insecure, I haven't been myself, and I'm trying to figure that out. Like, and that's what I mentioned, even therapy was about, like, things, very obvious things now in hindsight, but that I wasn't engaging with at the time. And then she told me about a struggle in her teens that she had, and how she's putting things in place or putting things back together. And right after that, like, that was just the way we communicated pretty much right away. But I remember when I shared all that stuff with her. Now, had we met in London or something like that, where I'd lived before, or Vancouver, and we met in a bar, I'm sure I'd just been full of my usual stuff, like, just chatting away and giving her highlights and all of this stuff. But I always remember the smile she gave me after I said all this stuff. I went into far more details and just share, like, it wasn't love in the sense that we were together at that stage. So I won't make it up and say that it was love that I felt, but I just felt like I was accepted by somebody. And I'd say I have a very high level of acceptance of myself at this stage in my life. Like, I have a very nice relationship with myself. And but then I didn't. Like, I was figuring things out. I was revealing and understanding things about myself all the time, and I was kind of trying to make sense of how all those kind of came together. So that was amazing to feel that level of acceptance from someone when I just told them a bunch of things that I'd basically hidden in all my previous relationships, and this hadn't even been a relationship yet. And she's just taught me a lot of things in terms of, like, she can round out my thinking a lot of times in terms of just empathy for people. Now, it shifted a lot over 9 years together, if you get me. But, she just has a different way about her. Like, in certain ways, she has this movement about her, like how she moves with people or how she makes people feel seen. That feels very uncommon. Like, one of my favorite things is if I can see her from afar and she doesn't know I'm watching, I just like looking at the other person. She could be buying flowers in a shop, and I just know that they're going to have a big smile on their face after engaging with her. She, like, once again, like I said to my mum, not to make a perfect masterpiece of all of these things. Like, I don't know about you with your partner, but with Aoife, like, some of the things that just I absolutely adore about her can also just drive me nuts, obviously, right? Like, and I'd never want to do without the things that drive me nuts, because I just know it wouldn't be her anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was just in bringing, I think, even more kindness to myself and bringing more kindness to other people, and also just in having a greater appreciation for someone else's struggles. And then, whether it's other people in my life, that I can have that experience of seeing what she experienced or what she can experience, and to just have a very different view of that. So for a million reasons, I could say Aoife.
And I think what I'm struck with there, first and foremost, was that probably was that initial spark was about the realness of that first exchange.
Yeah.
Because it was a very real, authentic. I know that word's used a lot, isn't it? But there's a very realness about that vulnerability that you both showed each other in that moment. Which, as you say, if it was in a bar and you're shouting at each other and trying to get ahead above the music and stuff, you might not have had. I mean, you may still well have had that connection, but the fact that you began your relationship on such a strong footing of true communication is amazing. And yeah, of course, we all love the things we love in our partners, and it's the things that we find more challenging that we learn something from. I think, if I think about my own partner, she's. If I always say I'm the kind of like the soft spaniel puppy type that just sort of runs around the world and probably needs a little bit of protecting, and that's who I found. I mean, she's incredibly warm and kind and funny, and all the things you want, but also really strong for me. Like, if you're watching Ifa and thinking, isn't she lovely? Catherine's watching me and going, you lot better be nice to her.
Right.
Yeah, it's that kind of thing. I love it. I just feel like so sort of protected in the world. It's like a little shield. And the other thing, when you were talking about watching people in the world, my daughter she's one of those people that when she goes up to anything, like goes up and orders a coffee, you see people's faces light up, because she does it a bit like this. She goes, hello, yes, may I have a cup of coffee, please? Oh, I like your shirt. oh, I
Yeah,
like your thing. And I'm like, and I'm beaming in the background. I'm just so proud. I'm just like, look at my girl. She's just all loveliness and just leaves a little glow of something on the way, even when just buying a coffee, and that's lovely to see.
but I think it's there's something even just what you said there with your daughter, and I'll extend to Aoife as well. Is that like just noticing people?
Yeah,
Like
definitely.
just it can be such simple, small stuff. Like I notice them even in my local coffee shop. I could say to people, and I haven't even chatted to them much ever. I just say, "Oh, nice haircut," like to a
Yeah,
man or a woman or something like that, and they just light up because I think they know that you notice that
yeah,
you see them. Like, and I think it's one of the greatly underappreciated parts of this life. Like, this life is wild, right? Like
yeah.
some just stunningly crushing moments, some beautiful moments of awe, and just being mesmerized by it.
Mm,
And then we have to deal with these minds that are chattering away all the time. And then just small innocuous moments that you're like, what did they mean by that? Like, and they possibly meant nothing. But yeah, so all of these things can flood through. So I'm not denying any of that. But just the simple act of seeing each other and acknowledging each other, like it's I think it has a profound effect on us, and it can really shift us without, like, some detailed in-depth interaction. It's just a simple act of noticing. So even if it's a shirt, a haircut, noticing something different about the way someone's carrying themselves that day, even if it was a sadness or a heaviness or a joy or a lightness, like
mm.
I think there's so much value in that.
Yeah. No, definitely, definitely. I don't know. I'm probably a bit too much that way. I'm the person. I'm the annoying person in the morning at 7 a.m. getting their coffee and having a chat with people in the queue. But there we are. Forgive me, everybody. And okay, so that's if let's talk about number four then. Who's number four on your list?
Number four is in the last 14 months becoming a father. So my baby daughter Ava. Um, there's, I don't know. I think in terms of how I prioritize my life anyway, I've given lots of time to becoming a father, if you know what I mean. So in the last 14 months, it hasn't felt crazily rushed. It hasn't felt, to be honest, it hasn't even felt that overwhelming. It's felt like quite welcoming for whatever reason. And it's just a joy to watch a creature, like, I think we're all animals, to be honest. Like, so another creature just kind of, I don't know, develop, and to
Yeah.
get some sense of how simple life can be. Like, just, I broke parenting down to, if I can be present, in some sort of presence, some sort of mindful or awareness around showing up. And if I can literally show up, I take loving someone as kind of for granted if you're paying attention to them. Then everything will be fine.
Mm.
And there's something just seeing her development or her growing or her evolving, that just makes me kind of relax a bit more into this life. Like, I haven't taught my daughter how to walk. I haven't taught her how to laugh. I didn't teach her how to eat. Like, so many of these things just come naturally. Like, I haven't taught her how to, I don't know, like, just find fascination in the leaves as we're walking around Berlin in the fall now. Like, there's just something to just watching a child develop that just reinforces, I think, a lot of my ideas around just, we don't have to feel so much pressure in this life. It's all kind of happening and unfolding. And I think children give us an insight into just our capacity for a love that we could feel far more often if we just drop our guards a little bit.
Mm.
Like, that there's something to it where I feel a lot of love for a lot of people in my life. I can feel a lot of love for even someone who I've talked to for the first time, even in a conversation. There was a woman that I interviewed on my podcast that referred to some person having a near-death experience, and she kept it to herself, or what she experienced in that near-death experience, away from her child at the time, her children at the time, because she didn't think they'd be able to grasp what she was saying. But she said the love for her children seemed like a candlelight compared to a sun, based on what she felt when she was no longer confined to this human experience. And I don't know, like, there's something about a child for me. I don't like, because I see love as love. Like, I think it's a human thing to give different denominations of love. Well, that's the love I feel for my partner. That's the love I feel for my mother and my child, with my friends. But I think children, or my daughter for me, has given me just a window or a portal into that love on such an easy basis. Like, it's effortless. Like, just a smile from a child, like from her, or her just coming up and giving me a hug, or going for afternoon naps with each other, and just seeing the smile on her head when she wakes up and realizes where we are. Like, I don't know, there's something so simple and kind of magical to it, that she really she reinforces a lot of the things that I kind of already felt in the last number of years, the more I paid attention to these things. But she's felt like a really strong kind of confirmation of all of that.
Like a purity, isn't there? Because it's that kind of, there's a newness to it all, so it's unadulterated. And I can totally relate. I remember a friend of mine coming round after my daughter was born, and she said, "Have you actually taken your eyes off her yet?"
Yeah.
Because I was holding this conversation with my daughter in front of me on one of those little wraparound cushions, and the whole time I just didn't take my eyes off her, because I was just completely I'm amazed by her, just staring into these eyes, and just as you say, I think I share the same sort of parenting ethos as you, actually, which is just be present and see them, and let them know that they're seen, and that you are invested, but allowing them to be their full selves, and not an extension of you. They're not. My kids are not mine. You know what I mean?
I love this.
They are
Yeah.
themselves, and my job was just to enable them to be the best they can be, and whatever that looks like. So no, I totally relate, and I totally relate to that thing about coming to it a little bit kind of ready, in the sense of a lot of work done before about knowing who you are before you start taking on the responsibility of another life.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because I'm 41 now, and my wife is 7 years younger, so we'll probably be looking to expand upon the family in the coming months, or we still have to figure out when. But so of course I would like I would have loved maybe to have a few kids by now, if you know what I mean. And at the same time, I'm also relieved that there was so much kind of exploration and inquiry over the last number of years, because I don't think I would have had a clear idea who I was before having children. There's no perfection to this.
No.
Like, some amazing people, so many amazing people have come from circumstances and backgrounds that you could say, well, they weren't ready to be parents, or whatever it may be. So there's no succinct formula for this life, right? Or this succinct formula for happiness. It comes from so many different situations. I am very grateful that I'm in this place with myself when my daughter is so young, and whoever comes next, because just what you said there, I'm not putting any of my life on her, if you get me. Like, she's not there to fulfill or prove that I was a good or a bad parent. I'm me showing up, being me, and so therefore doing my best. The chips may fall where they may, if you get me. Like, she'll have things to reflect back on, where she'll go, maybe I need to see a therapist because of you, Dad. She'll have things to go, I'm so grateful that I have this, I have this part of me that you seem to embody. Like, there's nothing, I don't even have a child that talks back to me yet. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what it's like to have a teenager, none of these things. But a big part of my life in general is just, can I be present? Can I be myself? And therefore there's a trust in myself. And I can't see a situation when I'm older. Like, I often think, like, what would it be like looking back on my life, or what would it be like on my deathbed? I don't see kind of any morbidity to that. And I just can't see myself regretting ever being present and being myself.
Yeah.
And so with the child, I'm not, like, the work that I do isn't for her. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I get you.
I love
100%.
this sense of what
Mm,
you're saying, that they're not even mine, because like I didn't pick my, if I didn't, I have a dog. My wife sometimes I say sometimes it's like, "Oh, I'm so glad that we went at that particular moment and we got Alma, who was a rescue at that particular time." And she goes, "Yeah, but do you honestly think you would have got another dog and not loved it?"
yeah,
And even I said the same thing with about Ava. I said, "I'm so glad that we did wait, because if it was any other time, it wouldn't be Ava." And once again, she goes, "Do you honestly think that you wouldn't have loved her, another child, if it wasn't Ava?" And so I think even that tells me something about the kind of impersonal nature of this in some ways. Like, as parents, we're somehow kind of saying we're going to put our hand in a lucky dip or
yeah,
something,
yeah.
and a human will come from it. So I think we can relax sometimes with our, I don't know, this particular child. I think it just opens my eyes to a wider sense of love, and we could love so many things if we gave it that level of importance or intention.
You know, as you were speaking, the voice of a dear friend of mine, when I was, when you're, maybe you didn't do this, I did this. I wanted a bit of certainty that if I was going to do all these things that, I was going to have some level of control. I'm
Yeah.
laughing now because my kids are now in their 20s. I'm like, oh yeah, I thought I could have some control over who they were. And all she said to me once was, and it really hit me hard, she said, I said something and she went, well, we'll just have to wait and see, won't we?
Yeah.
And I'm like, it was like the worst thing you could have said to me at the time. Like, wait and see. No, 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 no. Tell me that if I do all these things, it's all going to be all right. She says, no, we just have to wait and see. And it was actually the best thing she could have said, because it basically in that moment said, yeah, do your best, see what happens. Because, they'll be what they're going to be. And you just kind of a little bit get out of the way. I think that's probably what she meant.
Yeah. But
Anyway,
I could echo that to our own existence as well. Like,
yeah.
I am finding out who I am as each new experience and moment meets me. Like,
Mm,
and there's things that I've never experienced before. So sometimes when people say, if I was in that situation, well, until you're in that situation, it's only speculation.
yeah, theoretical.
Do you know what I mean? So I think so much of life is this waiting and seeing, even though that's the last thing we want to admit sometimes.
Yeah. Okay, fine. I'll keep doing it then. It's not my favourite. I like to know what's what. Oh, well. Okay, so the big reveal of the fifth, the one you struggled with.
Yeah, so it's, the other four have had kind of, well, even with Ava has been more recent, but, the other three were definitely longer in my life and more kind of bigger influences in that sense. I was trying to think of, like, was there a teacher that said something at some point? And there wasn't. Like, was there a sports coach that guided me in some way? There was people that were very nice, but it didn't leave something with me. So, and then even when I got into things like meditation and, I'd taken sabbaticals in different parts of the world, was there one person that left a kind of mark? And not massively so, for whatever reason. And so the person I'm picking is someone who is a friend of mine called Dan, and he's a psychotherapist. And I guess why I'm picking him, and I think he's amazing, by the way. So this downplaying of it is, it's just more of a recent thing, but it was more, the other four came to my head quite quickly. And I've only known him a couple of years. I actually interviewed him on my podcast. And as soon as we met, it was very much even like the experience with Jindy. The thing with Dan that I just really respected was he's further down this path than I am. So he left a role in finance to go be a psychotherapist, a Jungian psychotherapist at some point. So he worked in the City of London as a trader and then moved into this. And the way he's walked his path and the integrity of the practice that he does. He's been practicing Zen for, decades, works with dreams and is not afraid, and he's highly qualified. He's a number of different qualifications even within psychology and psychotherapy. But he has a real strong conviction in how he engages with the world. And there was a moment even that he had told me before in a conversation before I brought him on the podcast, and he shared it there as well. So he sees the world very much like in a state of, like, it's a dream. Like there's a waking and living dreams. Like the world is interacting with us. It's giving us signs. There's symbols behind the things that attract us. And it's really important to pay attention to this. So he told me of an experience where even on an ICU bed when he had a stroke in Kuala Lumpur, how he was asking himself, of course there was fear present, but he was asking himself like, what is this dream trying to tell me? And so even in these really extreme moments, like he kept his own inquiry. And there's moments as well, just purely from a work point of view, that it resonates a lot with me as well. And he asked me to collaborate with something on him as well around kind of contemplation and silent retreats as well, which we'll be getting off the ground at some point. But the thing was, when I talk about how I'm doing my work, sometimes I don't make it easy for people to consume it, in the sense that I'm not looking to advertise to people's pain points. I'm prescribing more a way of a being, and I'm not looking to promise outcomes, because I just don't think that that's how this really works. And so he's always a big champion of continuing to follow my convictions, encourage, invite into his work as well. And there's just something about the integrity of how he offers his work to people that I think is greatly lost in this kind of self-development, spirituality, whatever world you want to call it. I don't think he takes the easy way out. Like he told me about making progress in certain institutions via psychotherapy and stepping away when it didn't resonate. And there's something about even my own path where, like I mentioned leaving finance, like the first time I actually fully stepped away from it was I'd quit a job on the first day with a 40% pay increase because the weekend before I did a body scan where I just felt a bolt of lightning go through me, and I just felt very clearly this wasn't for me anymore without a plan. And so there's a lot about stepping into the unknown and then not kind of giving away my integrity with how I try to attract people into this. I'm living and walking what I do for work, and I see him as someone doing the same. He's very much a close friend at this point, and even a collaborator on a book as well. But I also probably see him as some degree of a mentor as well.
Gosh, I mean, hopefully none of us get to experience that kind of extreme event of, being in a foreign land and having a stroke, and I imagine, terrifying experience. But to have the depth of just trust, if you like, that's also there for you to learn something.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can apply that in that moment, you're probably applying it naturally in every other moment. You're just like, oh, this is interesting. What's that teaching me? Yeah. As opposed to, why is this happening to me? This isn't fair. This isn't right. And having all that usual human reaction to any kind of adversity. So I can imagine. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I was just going to say, there's a good few people I've met now at this stage that when I sense or perceive, because a lot of people can read, I don't know, you can read A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle and start talking about ego and different things like this. And because we're such a mental and kind of intellectual society in the West anyway, we think we've learned something by repeating other people's words. There's some people that I really feel live and breathe their practice. And I've seen a handful of these people go through experiences in life where, as you say, it may reduce into, and it's fine if it does, if someone goes, why me? And they get flustered and upset. And it's not to say that I don't see people experiencing emotions like fear, but simultaneously they're holding open a view of like, so this, it opens up a wider space or a wider lens with which to view or experience life. And I've come into encounters with different moments of sadness or loss as well. And I still, for me as well, that curiosity maintains, like almost like, wow, this is fascinating. Like, or, I still want to feel sad if someone has passed. It's not to, I think so much of what we think is almost to escape the human experience, but no, it's very much feeling the human experience and holding open that kind of perspective or that curiosity or aliveness to still meet the moment of life And even if it's joy, for that not to be the only thing that we're experiencing, like there's space for
Mm.
more, there's space for a consideration of the experience that we're encountering.
Well, that actually brings me to my last question-ish. I've got a couple more, but this, I mentioned earlier in the conversation about how the people along the way have kind of shaped what you see as success and achievement and happiness and contentment. And I can pretty much guess the answer now. I think if Dan sounds like the kind of person you have in your life to show you what's important, and kind of make all the other stuff fall away. So I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So how have these people, these 5 people, really shaped you, and how would you describe their impact collectively on who you are now?
I would say that it's a sense of success would definitely be very much first and foremost kind of based off the quality of relationship that I have in my life. And the quality of attention that I'm giving the people in my life. That, like, I went over, since leaving finance, I went from earning by far the most I'd ever earned in my last year of finance. Like, things were really kind of taking off. And then by retraining in another direction, I've earned the least I've ever earned in my life, since I left university. And neither of those experiences really changed my internal experience of life. I feel very liberated by that fact. So much of this life is down to seeing the connections between us, and then like showing up with some degree of integrity around that. Like integrity, even in like, as I said, I have a large degree of acceptance of myself, but I can easily see when I haven't treated somebody well, and it's not to be perfect, but it's to acknowledge that, it's to be
Yeah.
accountable. It's, I'd say from my mum, she definitely gave me a sense of like fierce love and loyalty, and then just the capacity to work hard. Like, we always had, I always had jobs in my teenage years, whether it was the supermarket, the pub, pizza shop around the corner, delivering papers, whatever it would have been. Definitely a degree or a curiosity around grace and some wider connection to something bigger than ourselves through Maura. Just a compassion for people, definitely through my wife, that was heightened. Just this naturalness and this love that I think it doesn't even have to be earned or worked at with a child. And then there's something about loving what I do. Like, I wake up every day, and I mean this, like, I just had the experience. My wife was seeing my in-laws at the weekend, so I had 2 days to myself, or a day and a half to myself. And I just did like a lot of the things I did. Like, I edited a podcast, I wrote a newsletter, I wrote different things. I had different chats with people around, like, big, meaningful chats around what this life is all about. And so there's a huge joy in that. And I think when I pay attention and I show up as myself, really, I'm not entitled to anything. Like, I feel like I'm really finding a groove in what I'm doing now. But I'm not entitled to success from that, like in a material sense. But I think the real joy in life comes from just appreciating you have enough right now. And
Yes.
so I had an experience a few months back where I'm taking this from an office now across the road, but I woke up and I started writing something early, maybe around 5 a.m. I heard my daughter then after an hour and a half or 2 hours just kind of making these sweet kind of cooing sounds from the bedroom. I closed down my laptop, I went over to the bedroom, and I see her kind of arched over my wife, who has her back to me, who's still trying to sleep, I think. And she just had a big beaming smile. My dog had got up at the bottom of the bed, and her tail was just wagging furiously at me, waiting for me to come over and pet her. And then my wife looked around and gave me a big smile. And I greeted them all, and I took a few moments with them. And after it, I just said to my missus, like, Tifa, like, geez, my heart is so full.
Yeah.
And as much as, I could say, oh, wait till we're earning as much as I made in the last year of finance or something, I said to her, just like, appreciate these moments, because it's not going to get any better. It's not to say that it's downhill from here, But I think any moments where we feel enough, the moment is enough, that our heart is full, like that, like those are as good as it gets. And I'm very lucky that I get to experience that somewhat frequently in my life.
I'm just picturing that scene. I mean, my equivalent, maybe not as profound. I was, I took my kids and, so Catherine and I took my kids and my son's partner to go and watch a movie. And we were just sitting in a restaurant together, and I was just full of contentment. I was just so happy that we're all together, enjoying this nice meal, going to go and watch a nice movie. And you're right, it's those small things. I mean, it's like just a reminder, isn't it? And I love what you said about knowing when you have enough. You know, it's so we're so, I don't know, sold to, aren't we? That we've got to strive and we've got to push and we've got to acquire and kind of collect, and actually we don't. And I love the fact that you value people above all else things. I mean, obviously I've started this podcast for that reason. I mean, this is like, it's pretty obvious. This is how I think. But I was in no doubt, I think, when I asked that last question, my penultimate question, actually, how you would answer that. So, but I love that. I love that scene. I think that's very heartwarming.
You know, just very briefly to say, like, you know, I've interviewed over a couple of hundred people now around the question of what is a good life.
Yeah.
And in the first 120 interviews that were all completely private, there was just a question like, can you recall a recent or seminal moment of strong fulfillment? And people would generally, this was the kind of or the path that they all seemed to go on. They were almost trying to like filter out what was the most impressive thing that I've done. And when they just had a few moments to reflect on the question, they generally offered up like a meal with family, a great conversation with a friend, riding my bike, seeing a sunset. So I do think, as you said there, I think we've sold ourselves something that isn't necessarily true. And we keep seeking that feeling from things that aren't going to bring it to us.
Yeah.
Now, I still have need or wants. Like, I'm not saying that I'm devoid of any of these things. They're not the priority. But I also just know that it's not going to be the stuff that makes me feel full in my heart. It's lovely to have money. It's lovely to have freedom from that perspective. Absolutely. It's nice to have nice things. But it's the order, I think, in which we go after them that kind of makes us suffer a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, here it comes then. Last question.
Okay.
I don't know if did I even warn you about this last question? Okay, so you've had incredible people in your life, some really profound impact from them, some influences from them, and you've learned a lot and you've experienced a lot, and imagine they make you feel that this life experience is so much more than, like you say, just material kind of moving through it. So, key question mark is, what do you do, or what are you going to do to pay it forward? And I know the answer already because you're already doing it, but I want to hear it from you.
Yeah, I think it's the really simple stuff again. And sorry, maybe even, I don't even like calling it the simple stuff because I think it's the important stuff. You know, often I think we can get overwhelmed. There's so much tragedy and almost so many fires to put out if you look at the news at any point in time in the world, in terms of just war, inequality, all of these different things, and, you know, climate change. And, you know, I'm trying to figure out like what would actually make a difference, you know, like, because I think we get into this almost paralysis then, because there's very little I can do to stop a war right now, or, you know, anything like this. And so I think it's just really how I show up to the people in my life. Like, that's literally all I can affect, I guess. And so for me, that's just, I have so many conversations each day where I pay absolute attention to people. I make sure they feel seen. I remember what they've said, and there can be acts of kindness within that, although I think that is an act of kindness in itself. Like, I heard someone say recently, like, giving your attention is giving love. And so it's being that person. I'm not the person you call up for a coffee every week. We'll probably get into it every month or every couple of months and have a real deep dive into life for 2 or 3 hours. I think as well, there's something about like just making an impact even in your own neighborhood. So I walk around saying hello to everyone in German. So that's like Guten Morgen, Guten Abend, hello. Like, and I know so many people in my neighborhood that I may not have even said more than hello to, but we can have a big hearty wave across the street to one another. And it's not putting my stuff on other people as well. It's not holding people responsible, I guess, for my experience in life. It's owning that, and I think one of the kindest things we can do as well is just to get on some good terms with ourselves. Like, and so it's almost like that. It may sound almost contradictory, and you may sound like you're prioritizing yourself, but I think there's very little that I could do that would result in better relationships and friendships with people than to understand myself a bit more.
Absolutely.
To be able to either to notice, like to not hide behind my actions and say, and not do that kind of lawyering thing we do with each other. Like, well, what did you like, to be honest with my intentions with people. And I think the more we can lead this life with almost an invitation, like kind of, I guess, like showing that or displaying that in the world, it ends up, you end up leading your life with some invitation to either intimacy or vulnerability. And I think the more we can invite people to be there, to be honest, to be open, and I don't mean this honesty in a judgmental way, but just like really just to say it how it is, I think it liberates people as well to do likewise. And so all of those things would kind of come to mind to me, but it's trying to serve other people and serve myself in the best possible way.
But it sounds very infectious, and I like it. It's a good infection. You know, you know what I mean? It's the good one because I hear exactly what you're saying. Is like if I wake up and I'm off in myself, even if it's mildly, I may not put so much positivity in the world that day. I may not be so friendly. I may not be so open. So doing that inner work of making sure you're okay with yourself. That's kind of that inside out thing, isn't it? What you feel on the inside is what you're projecting on the outside, and it is infectious. If you're the type that like a hearty wave, I like the sound of that. I'm a hearty waver as well. Probably people think, who is this crazy lady waving at me across the street? It's me. No, I believe in all that stuff. I believe in small interactions. I believe in connecting people. I believe in, just taking that extra moment to remember someone's, name or the thing that they said about last time. And just, I totally agree with that. I associate those kind of things with love very much. Love that and food. If you make me a dinner, I'll love you forever. That's me. But no, I mean, I do. I think it's that noticing of things. That's something I've picked up from talking to you today, is that you do notice. And I knew I was going to love this conversation. I knew that this you were the right person for me to launch this podcast with. I remember coming on your show and being just really struck with how much you were paying attention to what I was saying. You really dial in, and I felt very relaxed in your presence, as I have now. I feel, we could talk for hours more. But Mark, really, honestly, I've really enjoyed this conversation, really, truly. And I think we both cut from the similar cloth. But I think you might just be ahead of me. I've got some work to do, I think. But thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. And I wish you all the very best in your podcast, particularly. If anybody's wants to hear a fantastic conversation about how to live, then What is a Good Life is a definite listen. So thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
Julia, thank you so much. Such an honor to speak with you on your first podcast. It was such a joy. I was really struck in all the times I've spoken with you, just with the transparent way that you show up, and just how genuine and warm and inviting it is, even in this experience as well of being on your podcast. So really looking forward to following it, and I wish you all the best with it. I think it will be brilliant.
Oh, bless you. Thank you, Mark. Wow, I really enjoyed that. Mark is such a dear man, and you can tell by the people that he chose to honour just where his values lie. Please do check out his Substack and podcast, What is a Good Life? It's a great listen. And if you like this conversation, please like, review, and share with a friend. This is my very first podcast, and I'm so very appreciative of any support you can give. Join me next week when I introduce you to Jindy. You might recall that I mentioned him at least 3 times in my introduction to Mark. Sorry, Mark. And as you can tell, I'm a huge fan and can't wait for you to hear our discussion. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.